Morning all. Let's have a look at the very exciting round 2 game between Hikaru Nakamura, one of my favourite GMs at the moment actually, rated 2772 against Gata Kamsky 2741. Okay, so it's the number 1 versus number 2 players in the States. So, Battle of USA, E4. Naka kicked off with E4 and we saw the Sicilian defence from Gata. After knight F3, now we see actually E6. Now E6 is the 3rd most popular move. The most popular is D6. The 2nd most popular is actually knight C6. But E6, D4, open Sicilian, C takes, knight takes. And now here, the key move here, the most popular, is A6, to continue with A6. 2nd most popular is knight C6. We're talking more than 18,000 games. It's a very, very popular position, of course. Knight F6, 3rd most popular, but A6 is the most played move in this position. And now actually White usually responds avoiding a pin, I think. It looks nasty to have that pin. The most popular move is actually Bishop D3 with 10,428. Knight C3 slightly less popular, 9,976. Indeed, after knight c3, well, it's not the pin immediately which is actually played though. So maybe it's something else. Actually, maybe that's a bad assumption. That's very rarely played. Bishop b4. The most popular is queen c7 here. So let's go back anyway. So knight c3, queen c7 is the most popular. Knight c6 and 2nd most popular. b5 3rd most popular. b5 was played, and now we see bishop d3. That is the main move here. Now queen b6 in this position is the main move with 1156 games. And that's supposed to be slightly better for White. Bishop b7 was played in the game. It's still supposed to be slightly better for White. 561 games. White castles is the main move. Now the main move here is to play queen c7. So queen c7 doesn't invite any exchange on c6. The move played does invite an exchange on c6. And it promises, theoretically, I've got 142 games, promising a slight advantage overall for White. So knight takes c6 is the move. Bishop takes c6. Now rook e1. And White's already lining up now for this knight d5. The king's still in the centre. Black plays actually queen b8. This is the 3rd most popular move. The most popular is bishop c5 with 38 games, then knight e7 with 13. So queen b8. It's eyeing h2. There's no defender of h2 here. Let's come out of that live book analysis and add on an Nxc6 from here. So White stands a little bit better from the opening, not too much. He plays a4 here. Naka plays a4. Black responds with b4. He doesn't want, I mean, this looks horrendous for structural damage if he takes. So b4, now it invites knight d5. So this nice king in the centre with this mechanism of getting the piece back. That would be horrible for Black, I think. This position is not very nice at all. Queen f3, lovely for White. Okay, so King doesn't want to be any more exposed than it needs to be. In fact, bishop d6 going for White's king. Bishop takes h2 now as a threat, just ignoring the knight on d5. And this is actually protected with queen h5. Okay. And you might think, well, hang on a sec. What's going on here? What about, okay, knight f6, we've got knight takes f6 as an idea. Let's just check that to make sure. I think White just takes here. Then maybe queen h4. That looks nice. So in the game, actually, we see knight e7 instead. Naka takes on e7. Bishop takes e7. And he's always got this e5 push if needed now. And he plays b3. He doesn't mind bishop f6. He's got e5 if needed. So b3, and it looks nice to put this bishop on this diagonal. It looks like a slight advantage. Okay, a5, bishop b2, and now Black does accept double pawns, but it also isolates this h pawn Okay, which is an important characteristic here. Bishop takes f6, g takes, but now e5, so it unleashes the bishop potentially on h7, and now if, let's say, f takes e5 was played, it wasn't. I think rook takes e5 is looking good for white. The king looks more exposed here than it needs to be. So black actually responded counter-attacking with rook g8 is on g2 here. Naka defends with g3, and these light square weaknesses, you know, they could be dangerous in the future. Rook g5. Okay, so black's on e5 here. He plays, actually, Naka plays queen h6 in response to this. He wants to be on f6. So rook takes e5, queen takes f6. And now rook h5 protecting that pawn for a moment, and it looks as though, you know, this isn't so bad for black. If the king can get out of here and this rook can help, it looks as though black might have a dangerous position. Technically, the engine's like white here a little bit, quite a bit, half a pawn. Bishop e4 was played, queen d8, queen f3, putting pressure on c6, and that pressure is parried now with rook c5. Now queen e3 unpins. It might not be the best move. It is potentially threatening now bishop h7, materialistic. You might think that's really dangerous, the king's here. What if that can be used as a pawn sack? But actually, there's, from an engine point of view, bishop takes c6 is very interesting here, because if, say, rook takes c6, rook e4, and white is going in for rook g4, rook h4 here. So this is actually quite interesting, this kind of position. Rook g7, it's dangerous. If white gives up c2, I mean, is c2 even, can it even be taken? It's pretty dangerous on the dark squares, this kind of position. For example, there's numerous threats. So that was an interesting maneuver to get the rook in from, you know, using e4 as a pivot square as an alternative. But queen e3 has this merit of being able to take on h7. And perhaps, though, the bishop should have been pinned here. Technically, it seems black might have slightly blundered here. It seems rook e5, technically, just to get the pieces off, and black should be okay. It's not too miserable. If queen f4, for example, let's have a look at this long forcing sequence. h6 to protect the h pawn, taking care of things. Rook c8 now counterattacking on c2. Queen g5. This kind of line is equal, and it can go on, you know, a bit like this, and it's going to be equal. Okay, so in fact, you know, rook e5 may be a missed opportunity here, just to try and draw with the black pieces. After queen f4, I mean, I don't really think what else is white doing. Say queen f3, we still can just forcibly get 2 bits off, and you know, it should be okay again, same sort of thing. So in the game, though, we see actually Gata playing queen e7. So he's playing very dynamically to invite this as a kind of pawn sacrifice, because surely, you know, the king can wriggle to the queen side, and this makes the game, you know, very, very interesting here, actually, that we've kept a lot of the pieces on. And, you know, they're playing very exciting chess now. Is Naka really going to take this pawn, forced to be a materialist for a moment? And, you know, he's got weaknesses, you know, fundamentally around his king. He does. f5, kicking the bishop back to g6, but that helps the king march to the queen side. So is the queen finding a safe haven? You know, intuitively, I would say, you know, black has good compensation here for the pawn. White's, you know, loss of time to get this bishop back. The rooks are going to coordinate. These G and H files, you know, are potentially quite scary for the white king. What happens here now? Rook AC1. You know, this is a serious threat now to take on C2. King C7. The bishop tries to wind its way back to parry maybe this diagonal. E5, and now black is threatening F4 and Rook G8. It's very, very serious threats from black here. So F4 to stop black playing F4. Queen D6. Okay, Queen D6. Now I think if Black can get on this diagonal, if a move like F takes E, I think Queen D5 really dangerous, winning. So sneaky. Okay, these light squares are still fundamentally a bit unsafe. This next move, Rook F1, it can meet now Queen D5 with Bishop F3, and that should be okay. Bishop F3 here, or even Queen takes E5 check. Okay, so we see in this position after Rook F1, E takes F4, Queen takes F4, inviting an exchange of queens, but then F5's weak, and 2-to-1 here. These pawns might actually be useful in that endgame. Black plays Bishop E4. Now, if Naka takes on D6, I mean, how many of us would take here? Pawn up. You'd think, okay, let's take the pieces off. I don't think this is that good. The prospects for winning this position are limited. Look at that pressure now on C2. There's enough pressure here, surely, for the pawn. And the king's quite active. King E5. This kind of position. I'm not entirely sure, even though there's nothing stopping these pawns in principle. But Black's, even got D5 coming up. So I don't think Naka wanted, I think he wisely sidestepped to take queens off. He plays Queen F2. Okay, and it still looks quite dangerous for the white king now. Rook C3. And is there a threat, for example, okay, Rook H8, and it looks as though this is really getting dangerous for these light squares, and a sacrifice on G3 after Rook H8. I mean, objectively, it looks a little bit scary. We see now the move Bishop E2. Okay, now in this position, Black misses a key move. A very key move. The king, which has relocated to C7, is usefully, in some respect, protecting D7. This diagonal is pretty dangerous on the dark squares, and the instant suggestion here is actually to play Queen H6. Now, Queen H6, okay, doesn't mind, of course, Queen F4, and Black can continue maybe even with D5. And these squares are not too dangerous for the queen on this diagonal. But in the game, we see actually King B7, and there's a kind of weakness of the last move here, that the D7 pawn is a bit more vulnerable. So the queen is attached to D7, defending it. So after Rook CD1, okay, it doesn't matter about the C pawn now, attacking the queen, Queen E6. Now here is what I would like to start calling a mega tactic. This really, these mega tactics really transform positions significantly and destroy general principles. You might think there's a general principle that Black wants to get rid of this weakness by playing D5 in response to Bishop C4, but mega tactics just wreck principles, and I think here is a mega tactic. I think this would be a puzzle position. White's play, do you really want to encourage D5? Well, amazingly, Bishop C4 is played. There's a bit of a clue there. Oh dear. After D5, we see this mega tactic. Because otherwise, if the bishop drops back, it's a bit lame if the bishop drops back. I mean, it's still okay. The bishop can actually protect C2 here. This is still okay, but it's nothing to write home about, this position. But no, Naka's got an amazing resource here, which I think you might have glimmered from the arrows. If I give you 10 seconds, can you work out the full implications of this resource, though? If I give you 10 seconds here to find the move and its impact, I would call it a mega tactic. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, it transforms the position so significantly. You see, I think the tragedy is, it looks as though the Black King was doing a fine job getting to the queen side where it was safe, in inverted commas. But this mega tactic questions that. Queen C5, is the Black King safe? Is it safe, as the Marathon Man quote would say? Okay, is it safe? Not really. Not really. Dustin Hoffman playing in that, one of my favourite films. Because D takes C, there's rook D6. Nasty, nasty rook D6. The king is not safe. Where does the queen go here? Where? B6. How does the queen on a light square protect B6? This is how nasty tactics are. They're cruel. Absolutely cruel. There's no way of, you can counterattack the queen and you just get mated with queen B6 like this. Horrible. Get mated on a dark square. So what does the queen do here? This is winning. The queen will have to give herself up here to defend the king. So this really turns the tables shockingly. This resource here, just for a little bit of coordination between this rook and this queen, and even though there's this bishop in the centre here, there's a queen lurking around here, this is just indefendable, this position, after D takes rook D6. Pardon me. D takes rook D6. Let's have a quick look. It's shocking. Black's whole strategy revolved around getting the king to the queen side, sacking a pawn, blasting down at White's king, and it's all turned here. But anyway, so we're convinced now that Black can't do that. What other moves? And here the mega tactics continue in the variations. If queen c6, can you see the mega tactic here? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, what mega tactic does White have here? Well, there's two, but one's actually stronger than the other. Just to get a very good position, queen d5, horrible. It exposes that f5 is going to be weak after these simplifications like this. Winning the queen back, we can just take on f5, and White's going to be a lot better here. Pressure on a5, 2 past pawns. That's very nice. So let's go back. So Black in the game after queen c5 has very difficult choice here with this, these threats here. If queen b6, well, queen b6, bishop takes d5 check, and then we just take on b6 and then take on d5, and it looks a little bit, again, massive advantage in the rook and pawn ending. So in the game we see actually rook d8 being played, rook d8, and the mega tactics continue with the bishop attacked. It's ignored again. Queen takes a5 now. Black's being dismantled. But this also factors in really severely White's king safety, these variations, because it looks as though Black's doing really well with rook takes c2. Isn't this really, really dangerous? Forget the rook. Rook g2, mating. If it takes, we just mate White here. Check. And it's a mate, with rook takes g3. Thanks very much. But no. White again plays mega tactics. This whole thing, really, really precise stuff in this position. What does White play? Simple and strong to avoid getting mated here and giving himself time for queen takes d8. If I give you 10 seconds here, what does White play? Starting from now. Just rook f2. The point being, after rook takes f2, the f1 square is no longer helping in the self-mate of White's king, and given that's the case, White's not interested in king takes f2. There's only, I think, fractionally better for White after check. Well, okay, it's still a little bit better. But no, the idea is this, to take on d8. Maybe queen b4 is an alternative, but queen takes d8 is the idea of knackers. So rook g2 has got king f1 now, he's not being mated. Okay, but what's the problem here? What's the problem? Well, d5 is the problem. There's no time for rook takes h2. Bishop takes d5 check. Again, getting a kind of winning king and pawn ending is not very nice. So there's no time for rook takes h2. So Black plays rook b2. Still much the same actually. Bishop takes d5 is played, and we get this winning rook and pawn ending. So what is it about this game which I find personally attractive, which you might, it's the tactics. They just destroy general principles. This idea of bishop c4 won White the c5 square access, And with that, that was enough, tactically for the d-file. It's amazing coordination there at that point where bishop c4 was played. It really destroyed the general principles of the position that black was going to, in general, advance his d-pawn, reduce that liability. No time was given to that. Very tactical game indeed. Comments or questions on YouTube? Black Resigned here. Thanks very much.